Hey everybody, Colin Pennington here with the Calvin Asgrow, and I've got the pleasure of introducing our next session. It's no secret that developing strong relationship skills with your business partners, trusted advisors, and input suppliers is just a small building block to what's needed to build a strong farming foundation. In this session, we're going to focus on some of the key relationship skills that will help set up young farmers to form relationships necessary to begin to carry on farming traditions. Self-awareness, negotiation, conflict resolution, and the value of mentors are all critical skills that can help prove essential in running your business. So with that, I'd like to introduce Lance Woodbury. He's a partner and family business consultant with Keiko Isom. He's got a background in both conflict resolution and family business succession planning, as well as a passion for working with agriculture and rural communities. Lance displays the importance of relationship skills across all aspects of running a business. So without further ado, please welcome Lance Woodbury.
Good morning, everyone. This is Lance Woodbury. I'm happy to be with you this morning as we talk about building lasting relationships among the people that you work with. As you know, from working in a closely held organization or working closely with vendors or other folks that are important to your business, having a good relationship is paramount. And today, what I want to do is visit about some of the ways in which you can have a good relationship with folks, maintain that good relationship, and carry that on through the decisions that you'll need to make and the agreements that you'll need to establish. And this ranges from anyone to vendors and folks you do transactional work with, to key employees in your business, even to family members that you may work with in a family organization. Where I'd like to start is to give you some context around the family business life cycle. And what I often encourage is you to think about where your business fits. And if you think about the trajectory of a family business, particularly a family farm or ranch, there's often different stages that you go through in your organization. And the first stage is that of survival, where you may really just be struggling to get started. And every year is pretty critical. A successful crop or a successful calf crop or other things, just every year is pretty important to your success. And in some ways, we think about that as sort of living hand to mouth in the survival stage of business. And oftentimes when you're in this stage, you're really just trying to get enough financial equity in place to have maybe some savings or to where you can survive a difficult year. But it's touch and go. And if you go for a few years and you build up, you get to a more stable stage in the business where you may still own all of the business yourself, but maybe you have some kids returning to the business. You might start looking at a key employee being in the business. If you get through that stage, you start to enter a more professional stage of the business where you start thinking about policies and procedures, and you might start thinking about key employees in more management roles. They might have access to more sensitive information. You might your hiring practices, thinking about how you can be more professional in your approach. And if you've made it through the professional stage of the business, you start looking at the institutional stage. And this may be where you have no family members returning to the business. You may even not have any family members left in management. You may have a board of directors, and really the form of income at the institutional stage of the business is not salaries like it was in the professional stage of the business. It's dividend income, and you're looking more at the return on your assets and return on investment, but maybe other people are managing the business. And all along this cycle, this life cycle, are opportunities to do something different, what I call succession alternatives. But as a way to think about the discussion today, I'd like you to think about what stage your business is in. Are you in that survival stage? Have you made it through that survival stage and you're into the stable stage, perhaps, of the business? And it just provides some good context for maybe what you need to do to keep professionalizing the business. So I think that's important as we consider things today. Next, I want to just point out that if you are in a closely held company, there's oftentimes 3 different hats that you're wearing. And where we're going to focus today is a bit more on the management hat. But in that management circle, you wear lots of maybe smaller hats. You're maybe handling HR or operations or the finance function in the business. You're the PR person. You've got to handle all the risk management and marketing. And it's in this management circle where we want to talk about how you build and maintain relationships with folks. And that has relevance to the ownership and family circles. But just a note here that when you're in a closely held company, whether you're working with your spouse or working with family members, or even people that have just been with you a long time who you might consider to be like family members, there can be some confusion about which role you're playing. Are you a partner with someone? Are you a family member with someone? Or are you a coworker in the management sphere? But we're going to be focused today a bit more on the management sphere of the business. When we start thinking about relationships, the first place I'd ask you to consider is when you don't have a good relationship with someone, usually something is missing. So take a minute and think about someone you don't have a great relationship with. And then let's try and think about what the source of that poor relationship might be. And this work is adapted from a psychologist named Melanie Joy. She has a book called Getting Relationships Right. And it's really a pretty good framework to think about relationships with people. And so where I want to start is in this triangle, sort of at the top of the house, if you will. You know, oftentimes when you think about having a good relationship with someone, you've got a connection to them. There's something you have in common with them. It might be things you like to experience together, you know, hunting or fishing, or maybe reading books together, or reading the same type of books, or a TV show, whatever it is. And those are all sort of light ways of connecting. Sports sometimes is a way people get connected, but you have something in common. And another aspect of a good relationship is that you feel it has some integrity to it, meaning you feel that people treat you well, and in fact, you treat others well. Another component is trust, and really your willingness to share information with them. And then finally, you want to feel secure in a relationship. You want to feel that you are protected or they are protected. And I don't want to get too touchy-feely about it, but in the big scheme of things, you got to feel like the person has your best interests at heart. And that's what I mean by protecting. So again, if your relationship's not going well, it might be because there's not good treatment. It might be because you don't feel safe or secure in talking about things. You may not feel vulnerable or willing to share. You may just feel like you don't have anything in common. And so figuring that out and thinking about how to enhance all 4 of those sectors is what we'll talk a bit more about in a few minutes. I also want to say that from a self-awareness standpoint, it's important to think about the boundaries that you have in your relationships with people, meaning healthy relationships have healthy boundaries. And we often use the word boundaries, and I find it helpful to clarify what we mean when we talk about boundaries. And one of those boundaries is a mental boundary, meaning what will you allow or not allow yourself to think or believe, sort of how you talk to yourself a little bit about what's important and what, the attitude that you choose. Another boundary is a verbal boundary. We tell our kids not to insult other people or be mean to people or be demeaning. If you can't say something nice, don't say it. I mean, those are verbal boundaries that you put in place. And another boundary line is a behavioral boundary line, like what you will do or not do or tolerate from others. For example, we try and encourage people in businesses not to talk about other people, particularly negative things, sort of creating a triangle where you're conspiring with another person to talk about a third person. Gossip is another sort of behavioral boundary. We say, let's not have any gossip. So you might think about what your what you will do or won't do with. Maybe you won't make decisions with them at the table. That's a behavioral boundary. And then a final boundary that I'd talk about here is your time, like what you will or will not devote your energy to. And I would just encourage you from a self-reflection standpoint to think about these boundaries and answer these questions about what you will or won't believe, what you will or won't say, what you will or won't do, and how you will think about using your time. And that's a foundational element to relationships. And then there's the four elements: the connection, security, integrity, and trust that we talked about that need to be present in your relationship with another person. And again, this applies to family members, it applies to vendors, it applies to business partners, it even applies to people you might work with in the community and nonprofit boards and things like that. Occasionally, you have conflict with folks, and part of having a good relationship is being able to work through conflict with, again, partners or family members. And I real quickly want to just walk through the conflict resolution process with folks. And it's really divided into three areas, but the first sort of bucket of work is over here in the left-hand corner, where you just need to admit conflict exists. And I'll tell you, I've been in organizations that will tell me they don't have any conflict, and then I go in there and visit with people confidentially, and there's conflict running around all over the place. So a first step in working through conflict is admitting that conflict exists, and then asking yourself, is the conflict worth resolving? Sometimes people say, look, we don't get along great, but I'm really not interested in spending a lot of time trying to improve it. And that's an important question to ask in your relationships with people. Then ask, is the other person, the person you happen to be in conflict with, are they willing to work on it? And those three questions or 3 points, conflict exists, is it worth resolving, and is the other party willing to work on it, are what I call talks about talks, meaning we're not actually trying to resolve the conflict yet. We're just talking to ourselves and maybe the other person about, are they interested in trying to resolve it? And if you are interested and they're interested in trying to resolve it, then you need to understand the story, the narrative. And one way to understand that is to first ask how you might have contributed to the conflict. How might the other person have seen your actions or your behavior? And the point of this is that it really takes two people to have a conflict. And oftentimes we contribute in ways maybe equally to the other person, or we contribute in smaller ways. But point is, we all contribute to the situation we're in, and asking yourself how you've contributed to that is important. Then it's important to listen, and this is really important, so important. I've got another slide on the element of listening here, but how is the other person feeling? What's their story? What's their nonverbal communication like when they're talking to you? But can you understand, can you put yourself in the other person's shoes here and articulate, if you move up to the top middle box, can you understand why they might be upset? And the point here is to understand what their story is, how you might have contributed to it, but really to understand what's happening with that other person, what's going on inside their head. And then at the upper right-hand corner, you want to explain your side of the story, help them understand how you've been hurt. Most of the time in conflict, people don't intend to hurt one another. They're just trying to have their needs met. And so oftentimes I'll notice that of two people in conflict, they didn't intend to cause each other pain, but the way they behaved or the way they talked ended up causing pain. And if you didn't mean to cause pain, sometimes an apology is in order. But point is, you need to talk about how you've been hurt or misunderstood in the process, and then agree that both parties are not in a good spot. And do we want the relationship to be better? And usually by this point, the answer to that is yes. And then this bottom right-hand corner is what I call the magic question in conflict. And that is, what do you need to see or hear from the other person in order to move forward? In other words, to have a better relationship, what do you need to see from them? Seeing is maybe behavioral. So what kind of behaviors might need to change, or what do you need to hear from them? What do they need to say? Maybe it's an apology in order to move the situation forward. So when you get stuck in a conflict, come back to this chart and try and work through it. And again, where you want to end up is this magic question. It causes you to move forward and get you focused on the future. And oftentimes we're in conflict because something happened in the past. If we can acknowledge that we didn't mean for that conflict to hurt one another, then how do we get to thinking about the future? In this magic question can do that for you. I said listening was important, and I just wanted maybe delineate 3 different sort of outcomes of listening. And if you think back to the education we've all had about listening, it's oftentimes, hey, if you can repeat what the other person says or paraphrase what the other person says, they will feel heard in the process. And I say, let's take it a step farther and see if you can name the underlying emotion. So is someone angry, or are they frustrated, or are they sad, or are they enthused? Are they happy? Are they joyful? Can you name that emotion? And if you'll just try this for me sometime when you're in a conversation with someone, try and name the feeling you're observing. Boy, you sound frustrated today, or it sounds like you're really upset, or it sounds like you're just really saddened by this whole thing. Try using an emotional word like that, and I'll tell you the sense of connection between two people, when you're getting to this level of being able to name the other person's emotions, it takes listening to a whole new level. And then if you want to even take it to a sort of ultimate tier, you want to go from feeling felt to feeling valued. And here what you're doing is articulating why the person is important and that their opinion matters, or that their work counts. So again, this sort of runs a continuum between helping someone feel heard, in which you might restate what they've said or paraphrase what they've said, to feeling felt, where you're naming the emotion that you're hearing, to feeling valued. And that is telling that person why they are important. So, Susan, I understand that you're upset because this is what happened today, and I can tell you're really bothered by it. Is that right? And Susan will say yes or no. Yes, I'm bothered. She'll probably say yes. Then you say, it's really important to our organization that you have a chance to participate in the process. And what I'm doing by saying that then is helping Susan feel valued, that she's a valuable team member in our organization. So again, when you're thinking about listening to someone, think about moving through those 3 elements of communication. I wanted to put in just a few quick tips when it comes to working with other people. And this is just, these are just pretty helpful in almost any situation where you're trying to make a decision or work together as a group. And I'm just going to run through them real quickly, but you need to make sure you understand who's around the table and what their needs are. You need to sort of frame what you're trying to do from a standpoint of, if we didn't do anything, what happens? In other words, oftentimes when people are trying to change organizations or improve organizations, we have to keep coming back to, hey, if we don't change, what's going to happen? And usually that's a pretty motivating way to keep going. When we're talking about building relationships, I tell people to keep a focus on business and asset planning, stay future focused. So think about your vision, think about your goals. What are the questions or ideas you have about assets? What are people's roles going to be? Get them to talk about that. Talk about changes that might occur, and revisit this kind of discussion. And that helps keep your relationships on a positive path. I encourage you, if you're in an organization, in a small business, a farm or ranch, or even a big farm or ranch is still a small business, do you have an organizational chart so people understand where they fit and what's expected? If you're headed towards succession, You want to think about who's going to be handing things off gradually, and what's the timeline for that over the next 5 years or 10 years or what it might be, and how much of their work, 10%, 20%, 30%, might be handed off. It's important to clarify what you expect of others, particularly around knowledge, skills, and results. So again, these are hallmarks of professional businesses, but you want to move in this direction. You want to seek out and encourage experiences to learn and interact with your peers. In other words, one of the problems in a family business or in a closely held business or on a farm or ranch is you can be pretty isolated. And so it's important to strategically connect with people, even in the virtual world that we're in today. And you're watching this remotely, but the chance to get connected with some other people who are also at the Ag Summit and watching virtually, it's important to make connections with folks, even if it's a virtual connection. And then finally, and I'll talk about this in just a few minutes, but consider using an advisory board or a peer group or something to challenge your business to become more professional and remain accountable to progress. It's important to put a group of people around you that can help you continue to improve as a business. I want to talk about another model, and this, I think, in a way, brings a lot of relationship improvement practices together. And so in order to do that, I want you to first sort of focus on the middle of the triangle here, and that is a good agreement. What makes a good agreement? And what we know from work in conflict resolution, and this work was actually done by a mediator by the name of Chris Moore years ago in thinking about the mediation process, but it's been a wonderful tool to help organizations and businesses think about how to have good agreements with, again, vendors, with partners, with family members. And the first thing you need to think about is if you're trying to negotiate and get to a good agreement, over here on the bottom left corner, you have to have a good price, and you have to have a good deal. You have to have a price and terms that make sense. This is the material decision. So this is the price of the input, perhaps, or the price of a piece of equipment, or the terms of a loan, or the way things are going to be divvied up. It could be a relationship. It could be an agreement with a landowner, and you're trying to make sure that's a good relationship. You got to have good rental terms. And so that's the material part of the agreement. But there are two other parts to that agreement that are really important. There needs to be a good process. So up at the top, how you communicate and how decisions get made. In other words, if you're trying to negotiate a deal and someone won't respond, or they're dragging out the process, oftentimes that's pretty frustrating, and that can crater a deal. If they wait too long, or if you don't respond quickly in certain time frames, the deal can fall apart. So you got to have a good process. Sometimes the other side will go dark and you don't hear from them, and that hurts the deal too. So you got to have a good process. And then over on the right-hand side, in the right-hand corner, you got to have a good relationship, meaning you got to have connection, security, trust, and integrity. Remember those 4 words from our relationship slide early on. Those things have to be present. You have to have confidence in the other person. They have to have a style that works with you. You know what I mean? You just sometimes you might have what appears to be a good deal, and even the process has worked. But if you just can't get along with the person, or you don't have confidence in what they're bringing to the table, I sometimes use the example in this triangle of if you go to buy a car, and the car salesman, you don't like how flashy they might be. And I know I'm being stereotypical here, but polyester pants and a big collar and slicked back hair. I mean, that, you start to say, hey, I don't know if I can trust this person. But you go ahead with that, and then you start working on the deal, and you even think you are coming to a good deal, but they, in the middle of the conversation, they stop and say, I have to go run this by my manager. And they leave you in this little room or in this cubicle, and it's kind of hot, and there may or may not be something to drink. and they go and they're they're going to their manager's telling them what they can do in terms of price. And some of you have gone to buy a vehicle and you say, look, I'm not putting up with that. If I can't deal with a person who can make the deal, I'm not going to do business here. Even if it's a good price, they'll say, hey, here's how I want the process to work. So my point is, when you think about what makes a good agreement, it's really not, particularly if you're trying to have an ongoing relationship with an organization or a vendor or a landowner, it's really not just about price. And you know this from landowners that you work well with. It's about how you interact with that landowner. It's about the relationship. It's about some of the extra things that they do or you do. And so that's what makes good agreements. And I would encourage you to bring this triangle back to any agreement you're trying to make, any deal you're trying to get done, any vendor, partner, landowner, family member that you're trying to have a good relationship with, and walk around this triangle and say, do we have good decisions? Do we have a good process about how we reach decisions? And can I trust the other person? And if you can do that, I think this triangle can be helpful to you. Oftentimes, we're trying to, in improving relationships, we're trying to bring others along. Sometimes we'll say, hey, I want the person to have buy-in, or I want people to participate in the decision, or I want them to have psychological ownership of what we're doing. And when you're thinking about making a decision, here's how to bring others along with you. First of all, in the sort of 2 o'clock corner of the circle here, there's reflection, and that is, what do I think? And let's just take, for example, the purchase of a tractor, piece of equipment. You might be thinking about, hey, what kind of tractor do I need for the next couple of years? What are prices doing? What's the status of my current tractor? How much horsepower do I need? If we grow, will I need more than one tractor? I mean, all those kinds of questions you're mulling over as you're drifting off to sleep at night, or thinking about things as you're back and forth harvesting. You start to think about, hey, what's the future look like, and what do I need? And so in that particular tractor, you start thinking about that. And then if you're involved with other people in the business, it could be your spouse, it could be family business partners, you want to turn I knowledge into we knowledge through mutual education. In other words, you want to say to them, hey, this is how I see the future. How do you see the future? I think we need another tractor. What do you think? And you sort of fool around down there, again, in the 4 to 5 o'clock range of this circle, trying to make sure that you get on the same page about how you see the future. And then you move over to the planning, where you might say, hey, are we going to buy it? Are we going to lease it? Are we going to borrow money from the equipment dealer or the equipment company? Are we going to borrow money from the bank? Are we just going to pay cash for it? I mean, all those questions about planning. And then once you have that figured out, then you go put it into play. And where I'm going here is that if you make these stages, reflection, mutual education, planning, and action, a bit more explicit with the people you're working with, you tend to end up with better decisions. In other words, if you work your way around this circle with, again, your partner, your vendor, your landowner, you tend to get people bought into the decisions that you're trying to make. And that is a part of having a good relationship. One of the most important aspects of having good relationships is knowing your own strengths and weaknesses as an individual. And in the Wall Street Journal, I think about every week, maybe not every week, you will see a column. I think it's it's either in the Friday or Saturday edition of the Wall Street Journal, where someone talks about who's on their personal board of directors. And I actually heard Deanna Kovar from John Deere talk about this one time. And so she kind of turned me on to the idea. And I looked back, and back in 2011, there was this column about a personal board of directors. And as you think about improving your business and your relationships into the future, I would like you to think about who's on your personal board of directors. This person, Karen Rohan, described that her own personal board is made up of several family members and friends. But it could be other business people that you know in the community. It could be a mentor that you've had. It could be a pastor. I mean, who are the people that you turn to help you think through decisions? And I'd like you to consider those folks your personal board of directors. They may not even know that they're on your board of directors, but and in fact, you might go tell them that they're on your board of directors and they didn't ask to be on it, but you said, "Hey, I put you on my board of directors." And that's important because as you consider your business over the next few years, having a chance to get feedback from others is so valuable. And in fact, when we look at businesses that are not doing well, it's usually because certain people in the business, the owner or family members or other folks, do not have a good reference point. In other words, they don't know how to look at themselves in the context of their impact on others. And having a personal board of directors ensures that you get some good feedback about how you ought to behave, about the business deals you ought to do. So be thinking about this concept of a personal board of directors. And if you would just stop for a second and write down a name or two of people who are on your personal board of directors and think about how to even perhaps formalize that concept a little bit. I want to move now to actually becoming better with a group. And over the course of the consulting work that we've done, we've had a chance to run some peer groups and put together a number of advisory boards. And we know of several other advisory boards that we don't run that are very valuable to producers out there. And so I want to put a plug in for the idea of getting together in a group. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to hire people to do this. You can put a peer group together and an advisory board together that helps you get better. And it helps you get better because you get out of a group. So this is extending the personal board of directors to a more formalized version, but you get self-awareness, so a better understanding of your strengths and weaknesses. You get some friendship and help through tough times. You get some new perspectives. Oftentimes, creativity comes out of that group interaction. You get clarity or focus on the things most important to your success. I mean, a bunch of people asking you questions about why are you doing it this way makes you get very focused on what's important in your business and in your life. In a group setting, you get connections to everybody else's resources and problem solvers. And we've seen a number of peer group meetings where somebody's using a particular vendor and they talk about that at a peer group meeting. And then all of a sudden, several people want to use that same vendor. Because they're solving a problem in a unique way. So you get connections, you get confidence. And this is maybe the most foundational thing here is having confidence to do what needs to be done. And lever your strengths in the business. It's sometimes, a push from some other people to do what you're kind of thinking in your gut is the right answer. It might be growing your business. It might be reducing or giving away some land that isn't very profitable. I mean, there's different things in business that you sometimes know you need to do, but need a push to get them done. And these groups help do that. A group coming together can sometimes influence price, can influence programs, meaning you can negotiate together with vendors or providers in certain ways. You can advocate for certain policies. Also, being together in a group gives you a benchmark to know sort of how you're performing relative to others. And finally, in a peer group or advisory board, you get mentors, people that will guide you along the journey of your business growth. And we have seen such good returns to people who have participated. And again, doesn't have to be super formal, but and it doesn't have to be facilitated, but people gathering in a group to intentionally work on their business and work on themselves is so valuable to people. Over on the right side of this slide, what I tried to do was have a funnel where if you think about a group or what you get in a group, and the top part of the funnel is sort of maybe a lesser form of commitment. As you work down through the funnel, you go from introductions and networking down to benchmarking and actually getting challenged or on your business or having a business review or getting into specific, here's how we better our cost or revenue strategies, all the way down to some people in peer groups maybe come together in a merger or acquisition. So that's not saying you have to do that, but here are some of the ways to think about what you might get out of a peer group or out of an advisory board. If I move to the advisory board structure, oftentimes we'll see businesses put 2 or 3 people around the table 3 or 4 times a year to help them think through particular business decisions, business opportunities. And those advisory boards are just invaluable in terms of getting outside perspective. And if you're interested in more information or resources about those, feel free to email me. As we draw down to a close here, I just wanted to maybe back up and say, when you think about relationships and improving relationships in your business, if you start from a foundation of knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are and having some self-awareness, and then moving into what are some of the parts of the relationship that maybe need to be improved, or what are some of the parts that will make it better, and then you move on into how you make decisions. That's sort of the flow I've tried to take us through today. So knowing yourself, knowing what you want to have in relationships to make them better, then knowing how to make good decisions, and then finally putting folks around you. I think if you think through those 4 items, you'll find that your relationships get better, get stronger, and you have better results in your business. But at the end of the day, leading a business, leading a farm or ranch in a rural community far away from people, particularly when you're a successful operator, that can sometimes be a point of resentment in a small community. And so what I observe around the country is that leading a business is lonely. And when you're thinking about relationships, ultimately what we're talking about, and again, we're in rural communities, we're doing business with people that we'll do business with for many, many years. There's a lot of loyalty. But really what you're striving for is friendship. And I love this quote from C.S. Lewis, where he says, friendship is born at that moment when one person says to another, "What? You two? I thought I was the only one." So it's recognizing that you're in it together, that you're experiencing similar things, and you start to say, hey, how do we improve our relationship to make both of our organizations better? And when you start thinking about that, or when you have a good friendship, those things naturally come along. So hopefully in this presentation, you've gained some understanding about what makes a good relationship, and it's given you some things to think about as you try and make those relationships better. And again, ultimately the result is that you have a good friendship and a good relationship with people that you work with. I'm going to be on to answer a few questions, but I just want to thank you again for participating in DTN's Ag Summit, and I hope you find the information valuable. Thank you.